Hi, I'm Doug Young. I'm here at Dream Guitars, surrounded by a lot of wonderful instruments, and we're talking about playing fingerstyle guitar a little more expressively and melodically. This is the second video in a three-part series. In video one, we explored playing single-line melodies, and we went through some techniques that you can use to try to add some expression to your melodies. But now I'd like to get back to fingerstyle arrangements, where we add the accompaniment back in, hopefully without losing that melodic phrasing. In this video, I want to walk through 4 steps to creating a fingerstyle arrangement, again focusing on the ability to play the melody with as much expression as we can possibly do. The first step is what we did in video 1. Basically be able to play the melody as a single line the way you'd like to hear it. There's really no way that we can play bass and harmony and complicated fingerstyle stuff and make it be a good experience for the listener if you can't play the melody all by yourself. Play the melody alone. And by the way, if there's words to the tune, as there are in this case, it's a good idea to know them. Sing along in your head as you're playing them. It's a good way to stay true to the melody, and hearing the words will actually guide your phrasing as you're playing. So step 2 is to know the harmony and be able to play the chords more or less on autopilot so that you can focus on playing the melody over top of those chords. It's particularly useful when you're working on an arrangement to work out the chords in a few different keys, because as we're developing an arrangement, we're going to want to try different keys. It opens up different opportunities for easier fingerings or just different sounds. It's also useful to learn the bass notes. Basically just find the roots of the chords by themselves. For example, if we were doing Amazing Grace in the key of C, we'd want to know C, F, and G, but we'd also want to know the bass notes, just C, F, and G, because sometimes you want to just be able to find the bass notes along with the melody without the chord shapes. Step 3 is basically to put the melody together with at least those bass notes and perhaps add in a few chords. And so our first challenge when we're trying to come up with an arrangement is just figuring out if we can do that and continue to play the melody expressively. For example, if we play Amazing Grace in the key of C, the way we started out, it's actually somewhat difficult, especially if we try to play chords, full chords, because C is a full shape requiring 3 or 4 fingers. The G, which is a 5 chord, requires 3 fingers. And then if we play the 4 chord as an F, like this, we're really locked in. We're playing with all of our hand locked down. There's no way that I can do things like slides and bends and slurs and play melodically when I'm holding a guitar like this. So even if we just play the bass notes, in fact, in the key of C, we have to finger all 3 bass notes, which kind of locks our hand down and makes it difficult to do things with the other fingers to play melodically. So to play the melody well, what we need to do is simplify a little bit, and there's a couple ways we can do that. To start with, let's forget about the chords for a minute, and let's just play bass notes, and let's try to find a key where the bass notes fall on open strings. So the first key that comes to mind for me is E, because we've got an open E string. That can be the 1 chord. We've got an open A, that would be the 5, and we would need a B for this tune. We'd have to fret that, but 2 out of 3 as open strings isn't bad. So let's try the key of E with those bass notes. That's pretty easy. That's not too difficult. From there, what we need to do is work on playing the melody more expressively. But the nice thing is that I don't really have to worry about the bass strings, and also we can move all over the neck. I don't have to play it in the first position or here. We can pretty much do everything that we talked about in the first video as far as phrasing. For example, I can play it so at that point, with something like that, you might actually be satisfied. You can do the melody differently every time. You can add a lot of expression. If you're playing the right bass notes, that actually might be enough for a decent arrangement. Your listeners are going to hear that melody, you're playing it expressively, you get the bass notes outlining the harmony, and that can be an interesting experience. But from there, the 4th step would be to start dressing things up a little bit. Adding some extra stuff, maybe choosing a style for the tune. You can add in additional chords, you can harmonize the melody, and maybe make the bass line more interesting. In fact, speaking of the bass line, you can actually approach the bass much the same way as the melody. A bass player won't just play roots of the chord the way I was just doing. The bass line would be interesting in its own right. And we can use those same expressive techniques as we used in the melody. Maybe something like... and so on. Once you've got the basics, a playable arrangement, you just have to decide what you want to do to spice it up a little bit. So another thing I want to talk about as far as ways to develop an arrangement and tools that we have available for doing this is to think about alternate tunings. And there's a couple approaches you can use with alternate tunings. One is to start by just changing strings to solve a problem. Here's a simple example. Suppose we wanted to play this tune in D. We have what I just talked about. We have the open D bass on the 4th string, and we have the A, which is the 5 chord on the 5th string. But you know, that D, that's kind of high. Doesn't sound very bassy. And meanwhile, we've got the 6th string down to E, which in this tune, if we play it in the key of D, is useless. So maybe we could tune the 6th string down to D. So now we can play, which is much better. But you know, it might even be easier if we could play the bass for the 4 chord, which is a G, on an open string. And so I might tune down the 5th string down to G. So now we have something like this. And we've sort of invented a tuning here, D, G, D, G, B, E. And you can do that and just come up with all kinds of different tunings to try to make the fingerings lay well and make it easy for you. Now, when I set out to arrange Amazing Grace, I just happened to try a G sus tuning, which some people call Orkney. The tuning is C, G, D, G, C, D, and it turns out the melody lays very well with this tuning. Let me retune and I'll show you. And you know, with alternate tunings, you get a nice benefit of these ringing open strings and a slightly different resonance. It creates a very guitaristic effect. It's very different than the vocal approach that we've been talking about, especially in video 1, but it exploits the guitar very nicely. But let's take a look at this without worrying about the expressive part too much. Let's just add an accompaniment in this tuning. I'm playing the melody in the key of C. I've got an open C bass string, and I've got an open G, which is the 5, and the F would be here. So again, 2 out of 3 bass notes I don't need to finger. In fact, look at how easy it is to play Amazing Grace with the bass notes in this tuning. I basically never need more than 1 finger, and half the time I don't need any fingers. I can take my hands off the guitar. And it's really not that I'm being lazy. The idea is that if we can play the basics like that without a lot of effort, using very easy fingerings, then we can use all the extra capacity we have to play more musically, and we can start to explore the possibilities of the tune, adding in all the melodic phrasing that we've been talking about. Maybe something like this. So we can slide around, bend, and really do whatever we'd like to do without getting too hung up on difficult chord shapes and so on. And of course, from here, we can start to explore bass lines and adding in chords, building some creativity into the arrangement. So let's just recap a little bit. We've looked at 4 steps to building a basic arrangement while trying to retain the ability to play as melodically as possible and trying to keep the ability to do hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides, vibrato, and so on, while adding in some bass notes and starting to add in different chords and similar elements to our melody. So those steps were learn the melody, learn to play it expressively, learn the chords and the bass notes, play the melody and the bass, and try some different keys to find easier fingerings, and also take a look at alternate tunings to see if there's something there that could make it a little bit easier to find good fingerings that are easier to play. And then finally, we want to start finding ideas that you like and start to build your own unique version. And we haven't done too much of that yet, but in video 3, what I'd like to do is demonstrate what I came up with for this tune, a full arrangement that uses this G sus tuning, and we'll talk about applying some of these ideas for real. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll stay tuned and watch video 3.